Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell, coming to you a rare weekend episode. So past couple weeks have been super hectic. I know we hadn't done an episode in a little bit. It's kind of sometimes it's the off-season vibes. Sometimes it's just life gets in the way. We both very busy people, but we've been trying to do an episode all week, and now Saturday here early in the afternoon is our best time. But before we dig into anything else, RJ, how you doing, man?
Feeling great. I love coming in and talking the pod, and it's been a minute, but we'll be back. We're kind of getting into we're not into the low period yet, but we'll get into the summer, and we'll have pretty interesting episodes to talk about because there's not going to be that much news. But RJ Schafer and Jackson Caudell will be on the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. You better believe that.
That's right. Yeah, and I know right now we're a little inconsistent as far as the schedule goes. We do apologize for that, but we appreciate anybody sticking in with us. And before we get anything else, always would appreciate if you'd like this video, subscribe to the channel if you hadn't already. Got a lot of cool things, even though it is again football off season, but we've got baseball, ACC tournament, and NCAA tournament are coming up. Softball is currently in the regionals. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Obviously, basketball is in its off season too. Still plenty to talk about. Getting ready for what could be a really good 2025 Georgia Tech football season. But if y'all would just like the video, subscribe to the channel, go follow us wherever you get your podcasts. That would mean a lot to us. We talk about it all the time. So our main topic today is going to be we're going to give our post-spring ACC power rankings, which I'm sure will just be met with universal love and praise, and everybody's going to agree with 100% of everything we say. There's going to be no disagreement whatsoever. But all kidding aside, we did want to do this, kind of look at, and obviously these can fluctuate and, as we kind of dig deeper into the teams, but we did want to kind of give hey, this is where we see the ACC heading into the season. I kind of based it more off, the teams and the talent and things like that more than, say, schedules per se, because I think some teams that I might have towards the bottom may have an easier schedule and could have like a path up. Some teams towards the top could have like a really difficult schedule, and that can make them fall further back. But this is just kind of where we see the ACC right now. Let us know what you think. Obviously, we're all always open to hearing, what you guys think. Like y'all are just as much part of the show as we are. So we want to hear where people think we're right, where we're wrong, kind of in the middle and all that kind of stuff. But before we dig into that, obviously, we did want to talk a little bit about some of the other sports going on. Start off with a brief football note. The Colorado game, we know it got moved to August 29th, the day before the first Saturday, before week one. I won't say the first Saturday of the season, because as people that cover Georgia Tech, we should know that week 0 counts as much as week 1. So week 0 was a ton of fun last year, but that game time has now been set. It's going to be an 8 o'clock ESPN kickoff. I kind of thought that may have been where it was trending, because for people, I like to kind of nerd out about this stuff. I follow it pretty closely, but as far as game times, kickoff announcements, and stuff like that, so a lot of like the big time, the broadcasters like Fox, ESPN, and all, like they were having their like kind of advertising meetings and kind of showcasing what's coming up this year. Fox was earlier in the week, and when they didn't announce, because I know when the press release was sent out earlier, when the game was announced that it was going to move to Friday, it was said it was either going to be on the ESPN network or it was going to be on Fox network. And so it was up in the air a little bit about where it could be. When Fox didn't announce that they had it, I wasn't for sure that it was going to be on ESPN, but I kind of had a feeling that was the way it was trending. And that is where it went. So Georgia Tech and Colorado are going to kick off at 8 o'clock ESPN Friday, August 29th. I am definitely going to be there covering that game. I'm super excited to get to go out to Boulder for the first time in my life. Hopefully a ton of Georgia Tech fans are going to make the trip as well. And it being in primetime isn't super surprising. I think Georgia Tech is getting a little bit of, no pun intended, buzz heading into the season, and kind of looked at as a dark horse ACC contender, possible, just kind of, I guess, breakthrough team for the season. Obviously, Colorado, there's going to be a lot of intrigue there, getting even without Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, and the team they had last year, there's still going to be plenty of intrigue and eyeballs want to be put on a Deion Sanders coach team. So it's week one is pretty loaded in college football this year. And there's going to be, you got Texas, Ohio State, you got Clemson, LSU, you've got Miami, Notre Dame plays on the Sunday, and you have, of course, North Carolina, TCU on Labor Day. But like there's plenty of intrigue with Georgia Tech and Colorado. So that's definitely going to be one of the most intriguing games of week one. But you excited about the primetime kickoff for Colorado?
Best believe it. Over the past, over the summer, I guess, and kind of through the back half of last season, I think I've kind of seen Georgia Tech grow more into the national spotlight, and I think this to be a huge piece of that because Haynes King line to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Faulkner obviously is one of the biggest names in terms of offensive coordinators. He's one of the biggest minds offensively in the country, and I think this is just another way for Georgia Tech to be national, obviously against a team like Colorado, who has had all of the spotlight for the past couple of years. And I think it's a good opportunity for Georgia Tech not only to get a win on a national stage, but also just show how good they are. I think Haynes King, is probably going to have a heck of a game against Colorado.
Yeah, and I'm sure people get sick of me saying every time there's a chance for Georgia Tech to be in a standalone primetime window where a lot of eyeballs can get on you. Just talking about the new, revenue distribution, the ACC and the tiered systems and all that kind of stuff. Like this is the kind of opportunity you want. Like there's going to be a lot of people watching these games. I do know that Baylor and Auburn play on Friday. That time didn't get announced, so I'm guessing that one would be on Fox. But that's just a guess. And also in the ESPN press release, I do believe it said the rest of the week one and through week three game times would be announced on May 29th. So the kickoff time for Gardner-Webb, and then obviously the one everybody wants to know about is the Clemson kickoff. I'm very fascinated to see where they put the Clemson game because Clemson's obviously going to start off the season ranked probably in the top 5. I would guess at worst the top 10. Georgia Tech, obviously, they're getting a little bit of hype coming into the year. I'm hoping it would be a primetime game under the lights in Atlanta. When I looked at the week 3 schedule, the only thing that gave me a little bit of pause was LSU and Florida play that weekend, and then Georgia and Tennessee play that weekend also. So I don't know if they're going to get that 7:30 ABC kickoff. If you had to make me guess what time it is, and I know this might make some fans mad, I'm guessing they're going to get the noon ABC kick. Clemson gets a ton of kickoffs in that area. And then like the 3:30 ABC kick they can't get because that's the SEC only window, I believe. So, so I'm kind of fascinated to see where they stick that. If I had to guess, it'll be noon ABC, but we'll kind of see. And then kind of in other sports and kind of other news, we've got Georgia Tech baseball just been playing really well lately, trying to get into position to maybe host a regional. I don't know that there's enough time to do that. Maybe if they won the ACC tournament, there's a chance of that. But one game won versus Duke. They were down 4-2, come back. Mason Patel was pretty solid. Offense did enough late. It was a pretty good game. Last night was no fun for anybody. Duke kind of handled them pretty well. Their first pitch is supposed to be around 3 o'clock today. So ACC tournament bracket will get set today. I do think there is a chance, and I apologize if this is false, but I do think there's a chance that Georgia Tech can finish the regular season at the number 1 spot if they win and both NC State and Florida State lose. But again, if I'm wrong on that, I do apologize. So, and then softball, they lost a heartbreaker yesterday to Florida Atlantic. They are getting set to play Mercer in an elimination game. They did play Mercer earlier this year, and they did lose 8-5. So I'm kind of interested to see how they bounce back and see if they can get a win because it's just like baseball regionals and everything. Like if they lose today, they are eliminated. If they win, they will face the loser of Florida Atlantic and Florida because for those that don't know, they are in the Gainesville region. They did pretty well as you could expect in the ACC tournament to kind of get in position here to this regional. They were one of the last 4 teams selected. So they're in there with Florida Atlantic, and Mercer. Lost again. They they were trailing from the offense, could not get anything going for much of the game. Florida Atlantic hit a couple of solo home runs. They were trailing 2-1. They tied it up down to their last out in the 7th inning, went to extra innings, had some chances to win it, and FAU just came out on top. Like it was, I hated to see them lose a game like that. Hopefully they can get a win today. I would assume they'll probably face FAU in a rematch, and then because Florida is a really, really, really good team, and like I think a team that could win it all type of thing. So we'll see where that goes. And then basketball, they have been announcing we've kind of covered the new additions so far during the offseason. Yesterday, Lamar Washington, the transfer from Pacific, he started his career at Texas Tech, played for Pacific last year. He was announced to the roster. It's been a fine offseason for basketball. They've just been, again, announcing these moves. We've kind of talked about each of them at length. We'll see where it ends up. But are you ready to get into some ACC power rankings?
Yes, sir. I hope my Wi-Fi is ready too.
Yeah. So how we're going to do this is we're going to start at the bottom and work up, and we're going to kind of take turns talking about teams. We do have some similarities. We each have a different number one, which is interesting. We actually both have Georgia Tech ranked exactly the same. We have, again, some teams are the same, some are different. I want to preface this by saying, like, when I was doing this, I think there is a very clear bottom three heading into the season for me. 8 through 14, they could be anywhere. My number 14 team could finish 8th. My 8th team could finish 14th. It's just a mess. And you could even make an argument for like 6 and 7 possibly finishing in that back half as well. And we'll kind of get into why, but like, I don't know that there's a great bunch of teams in the ACC this year. I'll just start by saying that. I follow the ACC pretty closely, of course, but man, going through some of these teams, they lost more than they gained in the portal. I have some real questions about a lot of these teams, and just going through it was a little bit of a struggle, to be honest. And even some teams like 6 or 7 or 5, it's like I've got some like real questions and concerns here. But I think you kind of had a similar experience doing this, right?
Yeah, I went through my top 5 was pretty confident. I kind of had my order already in my head. And just looking at the rosters kind of reaffirmed that middle area of the ACC, it's just rough. There's a couple of bright spots on each team, but I think the holes of the teams are so much larger than, what could be good. And I think there are some teams who could surprise people. Like you will see on my list, I have one team a lot higher than most others would have. This certain team I have at number 7, but that bottom half of the ACC is just not pretty at all.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where some teams land. And when I wrote an article over at Georgia Tech on SI the other day talking about the FanDuel released new win totals, and some were different, some were the same. Like Georgia Tech stayed at 7.5. So when looking at Georgia Tech's schedule, like Clemson is at 9.5. Georgia is at 9.5. Georgia Tech does not play a team with a win total over 6.5 the rest of the season. Like go through the ACC, and there are a ton of 6.5 and 5.5s, and that's going to be reflected when we do this. It's like there's not much separating these teams, and some of the reasons I may give for putting a team higher, you may just totally disagree with, and that's okay. Like I'm sure some of these will be wrong, especially we'll kind of redo this as we get closer to the season, and we kind of get a better feel and kind of. When we dig a little bit deeper looking into these. But you ready to get going?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we both have the same number 17, and that is Stanford. So I'll talk briefly about Stanford. They were a pretty clear number 17 team to me. I think this team could end up being the worst Power 4 team in the country. Like I think like Mississippi State could be in there, like Purdue probably could be in there as well. Another team we're going to talk about here in just a second are probably in there, but like, man, there is a chance that Stanford is just a truly bad team. I'm sure most of you know by now, Troy Taylor was kind of fired late into the offseason. You can go read about that. They have lost a ton of key contributors. Wide receiver A.M. Manor, he has been really, really good the past couple of years. He's gone. He was an NFL draft pick. Their best defensive player, David Bailey, he hit the transfer portal, went to Texas Tech. They've just lost so much, and the guys that they brought in, I'm going to say this repeatedly for us, especially with some of these bottom teams. Some of the players that they brought in are just not high ACC quality. You've got Frank Reich taking over as the interim head coach there. Most know that Frank Reich was head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, was fired. Andrew Luck, the former Colts quarterback who played under Reich, he's the GM there. At least from the way it looks, this is going to be just a temporary interim situation, and then they will do a full-fledged search into the fall. So that, or, after the season's over, I guess. So that's going to bring about its own set of questions. Is like, okay, if this team that's already not supposed to be very good talent-wise, if they lose a couple games to start the season, how locked in are they going to be? Is there going to be? I think there's a pretty big quit factor here as well. There's not a lot of talent. I feel very comfortable saying Stanford is at best going to be one of the two worst teams, and I feel pretty good about them being the worst team. Any thoughts you wanted to add to that?
No, other than the fact that I think Stanford is in one of the worst possible situations a college football team can be in. Like everything is not adding up, especially in the transfer portal era where you have like a rental of a head coach. I think is a bad idea, to put it lightly.
Well, I won't necessarily say it's a bad idea. I think it's like Taylor was just let go kind of later in the offseason.
Yeah.
Like who's taking that job? And here's the thing: even if they did this in the offseason, again, I'm not a Stanford expert, a Stanford insider. I can just kind of tell you, just based off what I see and stuff. It's like Stanford is an incredibly tough job, especially in the era of NIL and transfer portal. I don't know that the candidate pool is just going to be vast anyway. So I don't think it's the worst move. My thing is just playing with an interim coach with a team without much talent. If they lose a couple early to start the year, and say some of them are really ugly, there's just an enormous quit factor here where this team could go 2-10 or maybe worse. So I feel pretty comfortable putting them 17. But we'll go to number. We both have the same number 16 as well. And that's Wake Forest. I'll let you kind of do the heavy lifting with that. But I would be – my comment on it is I would be pretty surprised if a team other than Wake Forest or Stanford is the worst in the ACC. I think these are the two worst rosters by a good margin.
Yeah, I really did try to talk myself into putting Wake Forest higher just because I like Dickert so much as a head coach. But looking at what they lost, I mean, you lose guys like Horatio Fields, and your biggest replacements are not even star players at Washington State. I just think it's a really ugly situation that they're in. I think they have the worst quarterback situation in all of the ACC. You have the freshman transfer from Charlotte, or you have Robbie Ashford in a quarterback battle for the position. I just don't think there's a lot to like anywhere on this team. You lost a ton of guys in the transfer portal, like you're going to do when you add a new head coach, and you added some new guys who either A, aren't proven, or are proven just not at the Power 4 level. I like the move at head coach. I think this will be a team that will be better in the future. Right now, it's a developmental year. I wouldn't be shocked to see them win 3 or 4 games, and I really can't justify putting them any higher.
I agree pretty much with that. I really like Jake Dickert. He did good at a program that doesn't have a lot of resources. It's kind of interesting that, he got Cam Ward to come play at Washington State when he left Incarnate Word. He had John Mateer there as well. So I think that should give Wake Forest fans some hope that maybe he can find a quarterback in the future. That quarterback is not on this roster. They have a really bad quarterback situation. When you combine that with a not very talented roster in the coach's first year, I think it's just going to take some time. Dave Clawson did a really, really, really good job at Wake Forest, and even getting back to that level it's just going to take a few years. And Wake Forest is another program. It's just hard to win in this era. It is, and we'll see what Dickert can do. I'm a fan of his. Hopefully, he can get it going, but it's going to be tough. So
I do want to throw one hot take out there, though. I think Nick Anderson at Wake Forest, I think he'll be a first team All ACC safety, regardless of how the team plays. But I'll let you go forward with your number 15.
our number
Our
15.
number 14. Yeah.
Number 15. So this is so our first three teams here are the same. So number 15, I'll go back out to the West Coast. I'll go Cal. I will say this about Cal. I think there is a chance, roster-wise, they're mostly it's pretty bleak. But I will say the reason I have them here, and I think they have a bit more upside than Stanford or Wake Forest, is there is a chance their QB is pretty good. They landed some sites have him as a high 4-star. I know, I think it's 247 has him as a 5-star. I apologies, I cannot pronounce his name, but he was committed to Cal, flipped to Oregon, signed with Oregon, wanted to get out of Oregon, and now he's back at Cal. They have him. They have Devin Brown, the Ohio State transfer, who was once a highly rated prospect. And needless, I don't need to remind anybody that follows the ACC that, hey, Kyle McCord was a former highly ranked Ohio State QB that left. Now, McCord, I think, was a little bit more proven than Brown. Like, don't get me wrong or anything, but I at least think there's some slight QB upside. But that's hampered with they've lost a lot of talent. Like they had a good secondary last year. They lost a lot of that time to the NFL. Jaden Ott is gone, and then Brian Harsin is the new offensive coordinator. I don't like that at all, and I just don't really see a lot of again, the QB could end up being pretty solid and could be an improvement over years past, because that's one thing under Justin Wilcox. They haven't had a lot of really good quarterback play that's held them back. This could actually be their best QB room, but it's just hampered by the rest. There's just, you lose difference makers on defense. You lose it's just, I think it's going to be pretty tough, and I would be a little surprised if they finish much higher than this. Like maybe they could get in the 12 range. Like I just don't think it's going to be a great season out west.
Yeah, like a lot of teams in the ACC, I just don't think there's a lot of proven talent on that team. But I'll move to my number 4 team. Honestly, a team that had a lot of praise.
Where we're different, by the way.
Yeah, Jack does have this team higher than I do, but I'm not too confident. All of the magic that made Syracuse one of the dark horse teams heading into the 2024 season is gone. You lose Kyle McCord, you lose LeQuint Allen, you lose pretty much every playmaker you had on offense, and you add a pair of quarterbacks in the transfer portal that could be pretty solid, a former top 300 recruit. You add Cam Pringle, the offensive tackle from South Carolina. It's just not enough to make up for what you lost. I don't think Syracuse was an incredible team by many aspects last year, but they were good. Like, there was a reason why that offense was good. There was a reason why Syracuse played really well against Georgia Tech last year. I just can't foresee any of that happening. I think Fran Brown had the right idea with Kyle McCord. I think that was a splash of a transfer. I don't think you have a transfer like that in this class. I don't even think you have anything relatively close. It's kind of a grim look for Syracuse, but I do think their roster is a lot better than anybody else 15 through 17. I think there is a pretty massive step from Cal to Syracuse, and that's why I have Syracuse at 14.
Yeah, so I do have Syracuse at 12. I don't differ much with you. The thing is, I thought about having them a little bit lower, but I do think Fran Brown does deserve some credit for what he did last year, yeah. And that kind of carried over for me. Like, a lot of these teams, as I've said before already, it came down to just a couple factors, and I gave an edge to Fran Brown over the two teams I had below them at 13 and 14. But I agree with you most. Like, every part of why Syracuse was good last year is gone. Yeah. McCord, LeQuint Allen, Pena, Gadsden, their defense wasn't very good anyway. Their best defensive players are gone. And, Steve Angeli and Ricky Collins, we'll see. I think it's a pretty big step down from McCord. The receivers, I think, definitely took a massive hit when Pena went to Penn State. I've got them 12. My number 14 team actually was Boston College. And I thought about putting them a little like where Syracuse was, just for the fact is, and this is both a good and bad thing, I think, is Boston College has been pretty quiet when it comes to the portal. They haven't really lost a ton of significance. Now, they did lose their top pass rusher, who was an NFL draft pick. They lost Drew Kendall, who was a really good center. You obviously, you had the whole thing with Thomas Castellanos at the end of the year, hitting the transfer portal. The QB is just the biggest question. Like Dylan Lonergan was a pretty highly thought of recruit when he came out of high school and went to Alabama. Obviously, there's the relationship with Bill O'Brien there. I just don't. I don't know how good he is, and I just don't know a lot of the talent around him. I think they actually should be pretty good on the line of scrimmage, which I do think gives them some upside compared to some of these others. But it's just again the overall talent paired with the big QB question is it's just enough for me. But I will say, watch out for Lewis Bond. He's been there for a little bit. Receiver, he's a good player. It's just kind of just the rest of it. Like I don't know that their defense is going to be very good this year, but I have Boston College 14. So let's go to 13, where I do think we also differ a little bit.
Yeah, 13 is where I had Boston College. I kind of share a similar sentiment with you. The only reason I have them over Syracuse is I think they return a lot more talent. Now, did they lose a lot of their best players? Yes, but I don't think they had as big of a mass exodus as Syracuse had. So I have BC at 13.
Yeah, and I don't hate that, but my number 13 actually is Pitt. So this Pitt's an interesting team because they started the year off so well last year. They were 7-0. They got ranked. They went to SMU and absolutely got blasted. And then everything was just downhill. They lost 6 straight. But they do bring back Eli Holstein. I do think Desmond Reed is one of the best running backs that like maybe you don't know about. They made some additions on the offensive line. See, the thing is, before the transfer portal era where it really got crazy is, I could really trust Pat Narduzzi to have developed recruits and have a good defense. He was a really good defense coordinator at Michigan State. I've always thought he was a very, very good defensive coach, which he has been. The past couple of years, they have been bad defensively. And in this just era where there's just so much change and it's just hard to develop because, Pitt doesn't recruit at, a top 15, top 20 level where they just have guys maybe they can plug and play. It just makes me question the defense a lot. I do think there is upside, if Narduzzi does get the defense trending in the right direction would be just please get above average. Like they've been really bad the past couple of years, but Holstein has to rediscover whatever it was in the first 7 seasons or so. You do lose some at receiver, but again, Desmond Reed is a really good back. They added some nice pieces in the portal on offense, but it's just their defense. I just have a huge question mark because again, I used to trust Narduzzi to put one out, but after these past couple of years, I don't know if maybe he's lost his fastball on that end or, maybe what it is exactly.
Yeah, I have Pitt a little higher than you, but I do also share pretty similar sentiment. I just think their offense is significantly better than a lot of the teams at the bottom half. I think Holstein, if this team doesn't get behind themselves, like we saw last season, you just let one loss turn into another, and then you look at the season a lot differently than you did at one point. I think they loaded up in the transfer portal on offensive line. I have them up at 11.
I mean, all the way up at 11 from 13. Okay, so let's move to number 12. This is where I had Syracuse. Again, we've already talked about Syracuse. So who's your number 12?
Yeah, number 12 is where I had NC State. Again, this is another one of the teams in that big pile, I guess you can call it, of teams. The reason why I have them above some of the other teams is I think CJ Bailey is an elite quarterback. I think NC State, out of the teams in the bottom, has the highest potential to be very, very, very good because I think the young quarterbacks in the ACC are solid. We've seen that with a lot of teams, even with Georgia Tech. Like I think Aaron Philo is the future, and we'll obviously not see that this season. Hopefully next season we'll see Philo, but I think CJ Bailey at some point will be the best quarterback in the ACC. Is he there now? No, but I think NC State can rely on CJ Bailey. I trust Delrin as a head coach, but I just don't see the full roster coming together to where it's a 7, 8, 9 win season. Now, I think it's possible, but I just don't think they have enough continuity to make it a big season.
So this is one of our bigger disagreements. I've actually got them at 8. And
Yeah.
now that's not like I think 8, like NC State's a contender or something. Like, again, I said it at the beginning of the show, 8-14 is just the margin is very little. Like, I have NC State at 8. I could see them finishing 14th or 13th just because they have lost. I'm also a big believer in CJ Bailey. My biggest reason for having them 8th above these other teams is I just have a lot of respect for what Dave Doran's done at that program and how consistent they've been. They've never truly been bad, even though like last year, like they were pretty disappointing compared to expectations. They've had a couple other times when the expectations have been there and he's not met them, but they've consistently been pretty solid. You still have Hollywood Smothers there at running back, Justin Jolly at tight end, Noah Rogers, Wesley Grimes as weapons. Like, I know you lose Concepcion, Dakari Collins, and those guys. It's kind of like Narduzzi, though. I used to be able to count on Dave Doran to have a really good defense, and like last year was horrible to say the least. Now, I'll say a couple of years ago in 2023, they had a really good defense when they had Peyton Wilson at linebacker. So there's a slightly more recent track record of them being good on defense more than Narduzzi at Pitt. That's kind of my reason to have them up at 8. But I think they could be a pretty good team. I think they're going to be a tough team to beat. Like,
yeah.
I know we'll get into Georgia Tech here in a little bit, but one of the games I have circled as a potential upset spot is when they go to Raleigh November 1st. Like, that's you better be careful game. You know, you might think it looks like a Tech has a better team, and I think they do. But don't discount how tough of a place Raleigh is to play and how good Doran is as a coach. I guess I'll talk about it. So this is also a spot. You have this team a lot higher than I do. Number 11 is Virginia for me. This is a team that has done a ton in the transfer portal, and there's some good and bad to that for me. You know, Tony Elliott is going into his 4th season. The fact that he has to get 30-plus transfers in this, I don't know that that's a great sign of what he's been able to recruit and build there and his retention. Also, one of the things for me is I don't think the overall talent in this transfer portal class was fantastic, and I think some of these teams that have loaded up, I'm more questionable. I think there are some good players there, and I think you can find some good players that fit. But just some of these teams taking just these mass amounts of transfers kind of concerns me. Now, Virginia started the season off pretty well last year, kind of collapsed down the stretch. But I will say it did look like a better team than previously. It looked like there was some actual improvement, but it does feel like bowl game or bust for Tony Elliott. He brought Chandler Morris in at quarterback. Chandler Morris has had a journey. He started Oklahoma, went to TCU, had some moments there but couldn't stay healthy, went to North Texas, had a pretty good year last year, and he's now the presumed starter. They did lose top receiver Malachi Fields to Notre Dame. That's their biggest loss by far. But they brought in a pretty good bit of talent in the transfer, or also a good bit of players in the transfer portal. They've, I think, done the best job in the secondary, and their schedule is pretty favorable. Like, this team could – that week 2 game between Virginia and NC State could tell a lot between, like, 2 teams. I think they're going to be just mediocre ACC teams. But I think there's some upside to this team being, higher maybe around where you have them. I have doubts about the players they brought in. I've got big doubts about Tony Elliott as a head coach, and I'm also not a big Des Kitchings fan as offensive coordinator. So they've really tried to overhaul the roster. It could be good, but also the fact that you're doing this in year 4 doesn't, I don't love that.
Yeah, I'll save my Virginia talk for where I have them on my power rankings, but 11 is where I had Pitt. I think you do have some talented players, but again, like I said, you just don't know if you can have that magic that you had at the beginning of last year again.
Yep, and so I guess we'll start our top 10. I will let you take. Or, do you want me to talk North Carolina, or are you talking North Carolina?
You can talk Virginia Tech first, and then I'll talk North Carolina.
Okay, so RJ's got Virginia Tech number 10. I've got them number 9, so there's not much difference. Obviously, they were kind of the darlings of the preseason in the ACC last year. I mean, you had Pat McAfee. I remember him in Dublin when they were doing their playoff picks before Georgia Tech, Florida State, and he had Virginia Tech in the college football playoff, and then they lost to Vanderbilt just 1 week later. Like it was the bad for Virginia Tech was they went 6-7, and they actually had like there was some reason to justify some of that preseason hype because look at the talent on their roster. I don't know that most people know that they had 5 players drafted, and that was the second most in the ACC after Miami. Like, they had a good bit of talent, and they had one of the best defensive lines in college football. I mean, Antoine Powell-Ryland he had like 16, 17 sacks last year. He was a menace. Aeneas Peebles was good. Bashal Tootin was one of the best running backs in the country. But they not only lost those guys to the draft, some of the transfer portal's best players this cycle in both the winter and spring came from Virginia Tech. Like Mansour Delane went to LSU. Braylon Moore went to LSU. Xavier Chaplin went to Auburn. They had some other guys leave and go elsewhere. And they, like their rival Virginia, they have brought in a ton of portal talent. Portal players. I need to start saying portal players because when I say portal talent, it makes it sound like everybody they're bringing in is good. Unlike Virginia, though, they did change both coordinators. Like Philip Montgomery is the new OC there. He was at Auburn. He's been at Baylor. He was I can't remember, is it UFL or XFL? Like what's the other?
I think he had a UFL stint.
So apologies if I got that wrong. But so he was there. He's been a pretty good OC in the past. It's kind of been a while since he's been that. We'll see. Kyron Drones is back. To me, it all hinges on Drones. Like if he's healthy, he has shown he can be a really dynamic player. And like when his best is I think it's a down year for quarterbacks in the ACC, but he can be one of the best. I do like what they've done at running back. I think their offensive line can be pretty good. My biggest questions are on defense. Like the talent level or the talent that they did lose to the NFL draft and through the portal. I don't know. I question some of the guys they replaced them with. On top of you have a very young defensive coordinator who has never been a coordinator at the Power 4 level. So I don't know. And on top of that, Brent Pry I don't know how good of a coach he is. If you like my glass half full approach and why I have them at 9 instead of one of the other spots lower is 1, Drones upside, which I just talked about, and 2, they lost 5 one-score games last year. Like the only game in which they truly weren't competitive was when they played Clemson, and that was at least competitive for a half. And Clemson kind of pulled away from them in the second half, but they lost in overtime to Vanderbilt. They should have beat Rutgers. Obviously, we all know what happened in the Miami game. Like they kind of gave that one away. No matter your opinion on the call, they let that one slip away. And then just some games down the stretch, they should have beat Duke. They had chances to beat Duke and didn't. So my glass half full approach with them is I think Drones can be one of the better QBs. Their schedule's not overly difficult, and they lost some one-score games. If you can get that luck to flip, they could also, honestly, they have I will say for a team I have at number 9, they actually do have potential to be down with Cal and Wake Forest because if those transfers are wrong, if Drones can't stay healthy, also Brent Pry's on the hot seat. If you have some early season losses and maybe he gets fired or something, there's an enormous quit factor there. So I don't put them at 9, not lightly, but I do think there is some upside for them to be a pretty good bowl team is where I say for them.
Yeah, to me, Virginia Tech and North Carolina are the 2 Hail Mary teams of the conference. I got North Carolina at 9 and Virginia Tech at 10. I just have them switched. But the reason why I have North Carolina at 9 is simply just my trust in Bill Belichick as a coach. When you take in, 40 transfer portal additions as a coach, a lot of those being guys that haven't really played, you have to either A, see something in them, or you just need bodies on the roster. I would hope it is more towards A, that Belichick, has seen some talent in these guys. I think Gio Lopez is probably one of the most underrated transfer portal gets. At South Alabama, he was really good. Again, there's always the question of, will it translate to the next level? And I don't know that answer, but I think he was already a top 10, a guy with top 10 potential in the country. I think he's an extreme athlete. I think he has a great arm. And you're bringing him onto a team that is going to be completely different. Like this North Carolina 2025 team is I don't want to say the exact opposite, but you lose 30 players from last year. It's going to be a lot different. Obviously, the biggest loss is Amari and Hampton, but I think you're looking at a different team. You're looking at Benjamin Hall, the kid from Michigan. Gibson, the cornerback from East Carolina, I think was also a big get. But a lot of your biggest transfers on this team are group of five. So, like you said about Virginia Tech, I could see this team being a disaster. I could see it not working out. We obviously know how good of a NFL head coach Bill Belichick is, but the pressures of college football, the transfer portal, bringing in 40 new guys that you have to assimilate to a new Georgia, or not a new Georgia Tech, a new North Carolina outlook of a team. Like I could see that not working out, and I could see this team ending with 4 or 5 wins. But I do have trust in Bill Belichick. I don't think he would take this job if he didn't have confidence that he could do it correctly. And that's why I have them at 9 over VT.
So I've got him at 10. I kind of thought maybe somewhere in the middle was most appropriate. Look, I think Bill Belichick is the greatest coach in NFL history. I do have respect for him. I just don't know if he's going to be a good coach in today's college football. I don't love some of the staff he brought in, like Freddie Kitchens as offensive coordinator. I don't really know about that. Can you name me a unit other than quarterback maybe where you think this team's better than it was last year? Because there's not one to me. That's where I
think they're better at quarterback.
And that's what I'm saying. But I said besides quarterback.
Offensive line, probably.
No.
Just with the amount of guys that they got at offensive line, I think some of them have to hit.
Yeah, and look, I'm not even trying to be like a hater. I just don't. If Belichick wasn't the coach of this team, I just don't think that people would be talking about them. I've seen dark horse ACC title contender strap them. I don't know why their win total is more than some of these other teams. I've got them ranked up there at 10 just because I do think there's a chance. Look, they could just be excellent on defense because of Belichick. Lopez works out as a transfer QB, and they go 9-3. That's to me where it is. But we'll find out a whole lot about them when they play TCU. So my number 8 was NC State. Who was yours?
My number 8 was Florida State.
You want to go ahead and talk about that?
I guess. Florida State, obviously the biggest storyline is this is going to be a complete flip on the 2024 season. It has to be, or some jobs are going to be called for. But the reason why I have Florida State at 8 and I have a different team at them, or a different team over them at 7, is just I don't know if their offseason was significant enough. I don't think Tommy Castellanos is going to be one of the greatest quarterbacks in the ACC next year. I think you lose a lot of talent. You lose Thomas at cornerback, Farmer at D-tackle. You lose Ja'Kai Douglas. I just don't think they re-upped enough on any of those guys to have the season be as good as people are saying. Now, do I think Florida State will be significantly better than last year? I don't think it's even going to be close. You bring in Deuce Robinson, you bring in Tommy Castellanos. I think you do have the room to be good. But the amount of roster turnover and the amount of concern you had last year and how that season unfolded, I just can't put them any higher. That's why, like you said, your 1 through 7 is pretty unbreakable. I had to put them at 8. I can't see them being a top 5 team in any situation next year, but I can see them being mediocre. I can't see them beating up on some of the mediocre teams in the ACC.
Yeah, so I had them number 6, so there's not a ton of difference. My main reason for having them a little bit higher is, look, if anybody asks you to name the most improved team heading into the season, just say Florida State, because there's almost certainly no way they can. They were 2-10 last year, and one of those wins was against Charleston Southern. There's almost, and the other one was a 13-9 win against Cal. So there's almost no way they can be worse. I think, but the reasons I think they could be a lot better, and maybe even so. My 8 and down is teams I don't believe can have any, even if everything went right, I don't think they could legitimately be in contention to make or win the ACC. The top 7, I do. And Florida State is one of those. So I'm trying to figure out where Mike Norvell is, because is he the coach from the early years and maybe this past year where it's, Florida State was pretty terrible his first year. They upgraded 5-7, or is he somewhere in between where it's, they won 10 games in 2022. Obviously, they went undefeated in the regular season and won the ACC in 2023. We're a really good team. You had an unprecedented collapse last year. You have 2 new coordinators coming in. I don't love the Gus Malzahn thing. I think it's going to be hard to recruit either in the portal or in high school ranks difference makers at quarterbacks because I just don't think his offenses can. I just don't think QBs want to play in that just point blank. And that's why you got Castellanos, which is. It's funny that he's the QB because he was at UCF when Malzahn was there and hit the portal. I don't know if that's just because he wanted to hit the portal. If Malzahn didn't think he was good enough to be started, I just find that an interesting dynamic. I really like the hire of Tony White at defensive coordinator coming over from Nebraska. I think Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White could be good receivers. I'll say this though: neither one of those guys lived up to their potential at their former places. 2 places that do a really good job of churning out receivers. Like, say all you want to about Lincoln Riley, but he does coach good receivers and has ever since his days at Oklahoma, whether it's CeeDee Lamb, Hollywood Brown, all those guys. And I don't think either one of those teams misses them at all. Like, I generally don't think that they're sad that either one left. I'm not saying they can't be good, but it just – also on defense, where are the difference makers is one of my bigger concerns. It's like where I just can't name you a single defensive difference maker that they had. You had some guys leave, whether it's the NFL or the portal. But I think there's some upside because I think as an X's and O's coach, I do think Norvell is very, very good. I think he can find a good offense. Him and Malzahn are close, and I think they can find an identity, even if it's one I don't love. I think they're going to run the football a lot. Like I think with Castellanos, with their running backs, I think they can run it a lot and maybe hope for some big plays through the passing game. We'll see. I still think they've recruited Norvell has shown he can get stuff done in the portal. Again, I don't love some of the direction they've gone schematically, and that's my biggest pause and why I don't have them high. Because I think I could put them a little higher than 6 if I wanted to. But because I do like I do like Norvell maybe more than most after this past year. But we'll see about them early on. They play Alabama to start the season. They get Miami early on. We'll see. So I guess you had Virginia number 7. I'll talk about my number 7, which is Duke. Okay. And we've now entered, at least for me, I don't know how you kind of tear them up. This is the start of, if everything broke right, I could see them making a run to the ACC championship game. Maybe not necessarily winning, but being in contention. Look, me and you were both as down as could be on Duke last year heading into the season. I didn't think they did very well in the portal. They ended up they won 9 games. And, they were in contention to win more. And I think they did that while not having good quarterback play. Look, they were happy to show Malik Murphy the door and bring in Darian Mensah from Tulane. I think they got a big upgrade at quarterback. Manny Diaz is going to bring in a pretty good defense, in my opinion, nearly always. You also bring in Josiah Green on the defensive line, Caleb Weaver in the back bit. I'll tell you a recruit that maybe most don't know that can make an impact as a freshman is linebacker Bradley Gompers. This kid rose up fast, and he is an athletic freak. I thought he was going to flip because he was one of those kids that Duke did an excellent job at evaluating early on, and he rose up the rankings. And it's one of those things. It's like, and this is not meant to be disrespectful to Duke or anything, but it's just okay. Who's flipping him? Like, who's going to flip him and get him as a big time recruit? He stayed. I think he's going to play right away. Look, when you got one of the better quarterbacks in the portal. My biggest concern though is the receiver room. They had some turnover there. I don't quite love what's in there. The schedule is also a little bit harder. I do believe in this team though. I think Darian Mensah can be a big upgrade. I don't think Manny Diaz is a good head coach at I don't think he was great at Miami. But I think at a place like Duke, I think he can really excel with getting the right players to fit what he needs. And I think this is the ACC's most underrated team going into there. I don't think they're getting enough buzz as a potential team that could win 9 or 10 games. I really like this team. And this is when we talk about Georgia Tech in a little bit, like they need to be very careful when they go to Duke October 18th because that's going to be a big-time upset spot.
Yeah, and my thing about Duke is 2 of their biggest transfer portal losses were Jordan Moore and Eli Pancol. But with the identity of this Duke team, I think those are two great players, but I don't think that's a huge loss on them. I think Darian Mentz is going to do fine at quarterback, and I think they're in a position to repeat what they did last year. They didn't bring in a ton of guys uh, in the defensive transfer portal, but the guys that they did bring in were huge heavy hitters. I think Josiah Green is going to do amazing at Duke. Obviously, Duke is always going to have a good defense, but I think their offense got better, and I think their defense is equally as good as it was last year. That's why I have Duke at 6.
Yeah, and I think another underrated thing, Manny Diaz kept his whole staff together. Like
Yeah.
it's intact, it's going on, and we've seen that at Georgia Tech, especially on the offensive side of the ball, how much that can make a difference. So, like, I like Duke as a good team this year. Who was your? Yeah, you had Virginia number 7. So, who is your number 6? Because I had Florida State there.
Number 6 is where I plugged in Duke.
Oh, okay, yeah, so nice. So this, I know we both have the same number 5. So we'll both kind of talk about. We both have SMU here. I will say this, and this is one where I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement because SMU is ranked a little bit higher in terms of the odds makers and just most people. This is actually my most overrated team, at least getting some buzz. This team actually lost a lot more than you might think. And Rhett Lashley is back. I think he's a very good coach. I think Kevin Jennings, despite what he showed in the playoff game against Penn State, he is a good quarterback. I think just Penn State's defense is really good. They also bring back both their coordinators. Like, again, coaching staff continuity is good. But, man, oh, man, they lost a lot on defense. And their defense was it was good, but it was a little bit fraudulent. Like, it kind of got exposed a little bit when they played some better opponents. And I think also SMU did take advantage of a very favorable schedule, which, again, I'm not saying that's a negative. It's just I've seen just so many way too early top 25s just go ahead and plug them into the top 15. Like it's, just SMU made the playoff last year, put them in there. But you losing Brashard Smith, who was one of the most underrated all-purpose running backs in the country. I don't know who, their receiver position is a bit of a question mark to me. Defense, again, they lost a lot. Elijah Roberts was an NFL player. Jared Harrison Hunt, NFL player. They losing those guys, and SMU recruits pretty well, but not it's not the plug and play level where you're just, okay, well, they'll just replace those guys. I think this team will be good. I just think they're getting a little bit too much buzz. And I think just people are just expecting them to just kind of just keep it rolling along, even though you've only got 1 year of data point of them in the ACC when a lot of things went right. And now they have to show they can replace those players and still compete at a higher level, than the conferences they were previously in. And look, I could be totally proven wrong on this. And again, I still think they're a good team. And again, if they made the ACC title game, it would not shock me. But you get Clemson and Miami added to your schedule this year. So on top of, they do play Baylor and TCU non-conference, and those are going to. I know we don't talk about Big 12 here, but Baylor is my pick to win the Big 12. So that's going to be a big time challenge for them. So I like SMU. I just think they may be getting gassed up a little bit too much.
Yeah, and the one part that I like that you said is I think they underratedly lost a lot. Like you lose Ja'Kai Clark, you lose Justin Osborne, you lose 2 of probably your best offensive linemen on the team, which, to be honest, was the strength of the offense. Like you only give up 18 sacks in a season. You have Brashard Smith, who was really, really solid for you last year, and you lose plenty of starters in the transfer portal or to graduation. I don't see how they're better than any of the 4 teams ahead of them. I could see them being as good as they were last year, but I don't think the result of last year is definitive of how good they were as a team. I think they took advantage of an easy schedule, and I just don't think they have that this year. I think they're going to be a similar level of team, but I think we talk about drop-off from 7 and below. I think the drop-off from 5 and below is pretty heavy. I think Georgia Tech, Louisville, Miami, and Clemson, whatever order you want to put them in, are a decent bit better than SMU in the rest of the field.
Yep. I mean, just sum it up for me. Just losing the receiving core worries me, replacing a lot of guys on defense, but they do keep most of their coaching staff intact. Kevin Jennings is back. I do think Lashley is a good coach. It would not shock me if they're pretty good. And the thing is, they could be just as good as they were last year and be worse in the record department just because their schedule's tougher.
Yep.
All right. I guess this is what people came here to see. So we both have Georgia Tech at number 4. I'll just start off by saying, look, I do think this has a chance to be a very special season for Georgia Tech. I like what they've done. I do think they still have a good bit to prove, though. But, I mean, I'll talk about the things I like. Obviously, like, you're not going to find a better QB situation in most conferences. Like, you have a surefire starter who is a good college quarterback, Haynes King. You have Aaron Philo, who's already shown he can be very good. I think this is maybe the deepest running back room that they've had there if they can stay healthy. Look, Haynes has to stay healthy. Jamal Haynes has to stay healthy. Haynes King too, I guess. But Malachi Hosley, I believe in. Trelane Maddox, I believe in. But they were both banged up. I mean, Maddox was banged up last season, and then Hosley was banged up in the spring. But if they're healthy, I really like where this room's at. Obviously, one of the bigger question marks is, okay, look, you got to replace Eric Singleton. You need speed on the offense. Look, you got Eric Rivers. They really believe in some of the younger guys like Canyon, Zion Taylor. You also bring in Dean Patterson from FIU. A guy we hadn't had a chance to really talk about or cover was, they just got Bowling Green transfer Rakeem Smith, who's mostly a special teams, like kick returner specialist type guy, but he's very, very fast. He could add some speed. I could see him getting some touches in some way. Obviously, Malik Rutherford's back, but you do have some playmaking questions at receiver, but I think they're comfortable with what they have there. Offensive line, I believe in. I do have some questions, like, look, you bring Rutledge and Fusile back. That's a really good guard tandem. We've seen Ethan McKinney play pretty good football at left tackle. Needs to get more consistent, but we've seen it. Harrison Moore got his feet wet last year. I think he's going to take over at center, be pretty good. Obviously, the big question we've had was right tackle. They got South Alabama transfer Malachi Carney and Princeton transfer William Reed. I've said it before. I do have some questions about them up front, but I do. Brent Key and Jeep Wade, I think, figure things out. Like they did it, when Brent Key was hired as a full-time coach and they were coming from having one of the worst offensive lines in the entire country to having one of the best flipped overnight. Like, that's just kind of when you do that kind of stuff, I think you're in some benefit of the doubt. And look, they have to prove it on the field again for sure, but we'll see how that goes. Defensively, obviously losing Tyler Santucci is a big deal. He was really good last year. Defense showed a lot of improvement, especially when it comes to run defense. From all indications I've heard and seen in person, Blake Gideon is going to be pretty good. Obviously, I covered this when he was first hired. He's never been a coordinator before, so you have questions there. My biggest question on defense is just the pass rush and the defensive line. Is it going to be good enough? And to me, how good the defensive line is could be whether they are a pretty good team that's in contention for the ACC or they get there and they win it. Because I think the defensive line could be as good as it was last year and they still be in contention just because, again, the schedule is it's very favorable. They don't play Miami. They don't play Louisville. They don't play SMU. They don't play Florida State. They don't play some of these teams we've talked about being ranked in the higher ups. Like, they play a lot of that mediocre part of the ACC. Now, they have to go prove it, obviously, and they've struggled with consistency. But the schedule does allow them where some positions could be as good at or maybe even a little weaker than last year or previous years, and they still be okay. But if they get there and they have to face a Clemson or a Miami or a Louisville, the defensive line has got to be better than it was, especially the pass rush. You bring in Braden Manley. We've heard about Amontre Bradford. That's my biggest question mark going into the year. It's my biggest question mark going into last year. And the pass rush wasn't very good last year. It just wasn't. But you have Jordan Vandenberg on the defensive line. Him being back is huge. I like what they have at linebacker. I think they're pretty deep there. I don't have a lot of concerns there. And then they short up the secondary, with some additions in the spring portal window, and just the continuity on the offensive side of the ball. With Buster Faulkner being back, I think that's huge. Yes, losing Santucci is a big deal, but Jess Simpson, who did a fantastic job with that defensive line last year, improving it. You have Corey Peoples back there as well. You had to make some other changes there, but you had mostly continuity, especially on the offensive side of the ball, which I think is a big plus. So I think that the talent is there in a lot of spots. I think the schedule is there for them to take advantage of, and I think this could be one of the ACC's better teams this year.
Yeah. I think the only thing separating them from the top three spot is just for me, I have a couple of question marks. Like you said, I think defensive line and some aspects of the offensive line are probably your two biggest question marks. Now, with the Brent Key offense, do I want to doubt offensive line? Absolutely not, because the job that he has done working with the offensive line, throughout his tenure, is undeniable. Obviously, we didn't even get to talk about Josh Petty and Tay Harris, two of probably the biggest high school ads in the conference. I think Tay Harris will play immediately. We'll see how they move Josh Petty in. Obviously, he's going to play to a certain extent. Will he start? That's probably the question. But bringing in Eric Rivers and bringing in Dean Patterson, even though you lose guys like Eric Singleton, I think at most positions where you lost guys, you reinvented how you look at the position. Because obviously, when we first lost Eric Singleton, obviously I remember talking about it on the podcast. That was a humongous loss. Obviously, one of the best receivers in the country. He's a huge NFL draft prospect. He's still going to be that this year. But you bring in another guy who can fill the same role. I think Eric Rivers at FIU played very, very well when, like I've said a million times, the quarterback play was not that great. At every single position, I think you have something to take with you. I think at quarterback, obviously you have one of the best quarterback rooms in the country. Running back, you have Jamal Haynes, and you added more in the portal, and the running back room was already deep. At wide receiver, you have Eric Rivers, and just, again, a slew of guys that could play the position. Offensive line, you have one of the best high school offensive line recruiting classes in the country. You have a ton of experience. Defensive line is still just the number one question. I like re-adding Stone. I think he was pretty good at Ole Miss. But losing Romello Height and losing a lot of these guys that were on the roster last year is what stops me from putting them top three. Now, if they added a couple more guys in the transfer portal, I would probably have them top three, and it's killing me not to have them above Louisville. But I had to have them in the spot that they were at, and I think you do have the potential for a big season. It's just these transfer portal additions have to be huge, and I think they will be.
Yeah. And, look, I think, or at least I hope, one of the things we strive to do on this show is to be as objective as possible, yep. Especially when it comes to Georgia Tech. And, look, we don't like to blow smoke anybody's direction or anything, but this is a team I genuinely think that can be pretty good, but still have some question marks about, and that's why I don't have them just a little bit higher. We also have the same number 3, and it is Louisville. I guess I'll let you start, and you can talk about them a little bit, and I can, back clean up here.
Yeah. Louisville, to me, is another team that whatever position that they lost a lot at, like obviously Tyler Shuck going in the NFL draft, I think you re-upped with somebody of equal value, and I think they did that to a better extent than Georgia Tech did. They got Treshaun Hurry at wide receiver. Obviously, you lose Quincy Riley. Obviously, you lose Ashton Gelati. But you bring in Miller Moss from USC, who I think was a really, really, really good quarterback. Obviously, he was very highly touted out of the transfer portal. Some Big Ten teams wanted him. Some SEC teams were interested. And, I think you have probably one of the most skilled rosters in the ACC. I just think it's a significant step down from the Miamis and the Clemsons because they don't really have what I would like to call a star player. I think Gelati was that last year off the edge. I think Quincy Riley was that. But my respect for Jeff Brom is immense. And I think they did bring a decent amount of people in. You keep Isaac Brown on the team. You add Dakari Collins from NC State. I just think they added to every position where they lost to where they're equal level of talent as last year. But I think their upside is lower than some of the teams before them. Like I think Georgia Tech, SMU has higher upside. than Louisville in 2025. But I think at a baseline, as a team, as a roster, talent wise, I think Louisville's the third best team in the conference.
Yeah, I don't disagree with too much. I think I trust Jeff Brom to get the most out of a team and an offense, especially. Even though, like, here's the thing with some of the other quarterbacks he's brought in previously, it's like Tyler Shuck couldn't stay healthy, and you had some questionable offensive coaches. Could they get the most out of him? And that that was some of the things like Purdue with some of those QBs he had. I think what gives me pause about Miller Moss is I know he fits kind of the prototype of what Brom brings in, but like he was benched under Lincoln Riley, and I respect. I think Jeff Brom, arguably talent aside, might be the best coach in the ACC. I know Dabo has the titles, but just if everything were equal, you might say Brom's the best coach. I wonder a little bit but Lincoln Riley is one of the few guys I would place in his category, or probably above him when it comes to quarterback development and coaching. And it's like, okay, if Lincoln Riley couldn't get the most out of Miller Moss, is Jeff Brom going to get the most out of Miller Moss? Maybe he can. He could. But Miller Moss was just okay for USC. He made some plays at times last year, but maybe he doesn't face as many good defenses as he did in the Big Ten. Look, I think Isaac Brown and Duke Watson are a dynamite combo, but I agree with you. I just worry a little bit on the defensive side of the football, like with some of what they lost, because I was a big Ashton Gelati fan, and but I do think there is some chance for regression. Like I think they're a good team, but it's kind of almost like with North Carolina. It's like what spots am I just sure Louisville is better than they were last year? Like I think there's some spots where they're pretty good. I think wide receiver is probably the same, but I think they're mostly worse on defense. I think they actually could be worse at quarterback. I think it will. How much the running game I think could be a much bigger part of this team than your typical Brom team as far as pass attacks goes. But I think some of them being at number 3 is just the level of trust I have.
And I think their floor is pretty high too. Like
that's the thing. Go ahead.
I think Georgia Tech has the possibility, or has a higher possibility of a worse season than Louisville does. Like if everything goes wrong for Louisville and Georgia Tech, I think Louisville is probably the better team.
Well, and it's just Brom's just a more proven coach than Brent Key, and you have more of a track record. That's not like a knock on Brent Key. I mean, Jeff Brom's one of the best coaches in the country, and all that. And I would agree with you. Like it's even in his whole career, like there were some early steps, like in the first year or so at Purdue, like I know they weren't great, but like it's hard to just envision a terrible Jeff Brom team. Maybe it's more possible now that we're in this portal era and everything, and like because that's the thing, Louisville does rely heavily on the portal. And it's like, hey, if some things go bad, is there ever a quit factor? I factor that in sometimes with these portal heavy teams. But Brom is again, he's never really had a bad say portal class, and they usually get the most out of them. But all right, I want to say most people knew that we would have these two teams in the top 2, and we just have them different. I guess I'll let me go just because I know there's probably going to be plenty of pushback with this. I'm going to kind of be out in left field a little bit. I know I have Miami number 1 and I have Clemson number 2. And look, I think Clemson is going to be a really good team this year. I think they're going to be these are the only 2 teams I could see getting into the playoff without winning the ACC. Like I think, I know just going back to Georgia Tech, I know Josh Pate has said they could be a first-time playoff team. I think they could too, but I think because of their non-traditionally somewhat weak schedule, like I think they would either have to go to the ACC title game undefeated and lose it, or I just don't see them being able to get to the playoff without winning the ACC, just because their schedule is just kind of thin in between and everything. Like Miami and Clemson are 2 teams I could see getting there without needing to win the title. But some of the reasons I'm a little bit more skeptical of Clemson, I think, than the general consensus, and it's just the talk around them this offseason. I know people like Josh Pate had them number 1. I know some people have had them like top 2, top 3, and I know there have been some comparisons like, hey, this team is going to remind you of the Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson teams that won national titles. Maybe they didn't win the national title, but this is going to be a great team. This is going to run through the ACC. And it just feels like people are forgetting this team lost 4 games last year, and 3 of them were in blowout fashion. They got killed by Georgia. Do people forget that this team got absolutely blown out by Louisville and was pretty dominated at home? They were blown out by Texas, and there's no losing to Texas and Georgia. There's no shame in that, but I don't where was the impressive Clemson win aside from they backed their way into the ACC title game. If Miami doesn't blow a 21-point lead against Syracuse, Clemson doesn't go there. So that's some of the reason. I'm just doubting them, and truthfully, when I went through it position by position, I tried doing it a few different times just to see I think Miami's just as good at them in a lot of areas, and I don't think it's necessarily. I think a lot of it is just warranted skepticism of Mario Cristobal and if he can get the most out of it. Because I have serious doubts about that too. To me, I think these are clearly the 2 best rosters, and I think when it comes to blue chip talent and just overall recruiting rosters, whether it's 4 or 5 stars or even getting quality players in the portal, I do think that Miami and Clemson are roster-wise so much better than the ACC that they're really distancing. So, Miami's had the number 1 recruiting class in the ACC I think 3 or 4 years in a row now. And that's another reason why I just doubt Clemson's or high school recruiting's dropped off just enough to where it's okay, are we sure? A lot of Miami hinges obviously on what Carson Beck you get. Does he come back healthy? And when he comes back healthy, is he going to be last year's Carson Beck where he made a lot of mistakes, or is he going to be, 2023 Carson Beck was in discussion to be a top 5 pick in the NFL and a Heisman candidate. I know, obviously Carson Beck is not a popular player. People like to hate on Carson Beck. I get it. I do think there is upside if he is back to his old form. I think Miami has a dynamite running back duo with Fletcher and Jordan Lyle. They also brought in North Dakota State running back who was very good at that level to be kind of their third back. I think that's a great role to be in. They have arguably the best offensive line in the country. They are excellent up front. They have a ton of upside on the defensive line. Reuben Bain was banged up last year. He was a force as a freshman. And when I'm, just projecting, it's they lost some stars here and there, but Miami has recruited so well on the defensive line. You have 5-star, 5 former 5 stars in Marquise Lightfoot and Justin Scott potentially stepping into roles. You got a big addition in David Blay from Louisiana Tech, who was wanted by a lot of programs. If Akeem Mesidor is finally healthy, that's a really good player. Linebacker and receiver are my 2 biggest concerns when looking at Miami's roster. Linebacker more so. I do think they made some additions at receiver, and they have some, again, JoJo Trader is a former borderline 5-star player. If he steps up into the role and really does well, I think that could be fixed. Their biggest weakness last year was a secondary, and I don't think any team improved their secondary as much as Miami did. They landed maybe the best secondary class in the entire portal. You kept Shannon Dawson as the OC. Their defense was horrible last year, and they still won 10 games. Now Corey Heatherman comes in from Minnesota. I think their defense is going to be much better. I bet on talent. I always just bet on talent generally. And when it comes down to the nitty gritty, yes, I can kind of pick them apart. And I understand whether it's Cristobal, whether it's Carson Beck, or I know Miami is not a well-liked team in general. I think this is the best roster in the ACC. I think it's better than Clemson's. Again, I think Clemson is better at receiver, and I think they are better at linebacker going into the season. And if Beck is not healthy, obviously they would have an edge at quarterback as well. But I don't think this team is getting quite as much respect because of losing Cam Ward and losing that. But I think they replaced it with high-level talent, and I'm just going to bet on talent every time. So I know it's not going to be popular. I understand there's probably plenty of pushback on this, but Miami's going to be my number 1 team in the ACC heading into the year. If I'm not going to make an official pick right now, but if you made me pick somebody, I would pick Miami to win the ACC right now against Clemson.
Yeah, right now to me, I don't think there's a humongous difference in roster between Clemson and Miami. I don't think with the guys that Miami brought in that their roster is that much better. The reason why I have Clemson so handedly over Miami, and the reason why I think Clemson's praise is so deserved heading into this season is they're number 1 in the country in returning production. The biggest piece that you lose on this team is Phil Maffa. at a position where you can easily replace guys. And I think Clemson took a dip into the transfer portal, and I think you did get some very, very, very quality guys. I think Clemson has one of the best defensive lines in the country. I think T.J. Parker and Peter Woods are incredible. I think that is my number one defensive line group in the country. And I just think at every position where you're debating whether Miami or Clemson is better, Clemson has the nod of returning talent, right? Like most of the guys that are going to be stars on this team, with the exception of losing Phil Maffa, were stars last year. I think Cade Klubnik has another year to develop. Although I don't think he was amazing last year, having a year of growth with your team and returning talent, a lot of guys have talked about as that being something huge. I agree with Bill Connolly's sentiment pretty heavily that a low amount of turnover is a way that you have a good football team in today's environment. I think Dabo has instilled a culture where guys don't want to leave, and I think the reason why is they think they're going to win it all next year. Now, do I think Clemson should be in the national title talks that they are right now? I think it's a little bit egregious, but I think out of all of the teams in the ACC, Clemson has the best chance of winning the title. I think they have the most consistent roster. Again, like we talked about with Louisville and Georgia Tech, I think a Miami disaster season is much worse than whatever a Clemson disaster season could look like. I don't think the roster is that much different, but I have trust in what Dabo's doing, and I have trust that, I think Klubnik will be a lot better this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I do agree with you on that. Like, I do think Miami's floor is much. I think it's lower than maybe Louisville's or Georgia Tech's. Like, there is a chance that either whether it's injury or just drama or just something that Beck doesn't work out, the defense doesn't improve, the receiver position is just not where it needs to be, and Miami's 7-5. I totally agree that is very possible, and I do think that there is a chance because those receivers for Clemson were very young last year. The passing game, it showed it was pretty good against Texas, who had the best defense in the entire country last year, even though that game was kind of a blowout for most of the way. And look, I think Tom Allen coming over from Penn State, I think we haven't mentioned him yet. He is an excellent defense coordinator. So I know I have a lot of room to be wrong on this. I think my thing is, like, even going back to the return of production, okay, you know who else had best return of production in the ACC last year? Virginia Tech. So sometimes I don't necessarily put in, well, you're bringing all your guys back. Okay, well, all their guys they went 9-4 and were non-competitive in 3 of those 4 losses. Like, what was, again, outside of SMU in the ACC title game, that was Clemson's most impressive win. Like, they didn't – when they faced bigger opponents, and this is just a theme for the past couple of years and why I hesitate, is – I don't know, this exact same team just kind of wilted. Like, again, they got killed by Georgia. They got killed by Texas. They got beat up by Louisville. And, if Klubnik didn't have a clutch run at the end of the game, they would have lost to Pitt last year. So, like, and again, you can copy and paste some of this and say, well, Miami choked at the end of the year. I feel like their roster upside is higher, and I'm just going to bet on the talent. But I think Clemson is for sure the safer bet. Like, Dabo swing, like even some of these teams with Dabo, when they had DJU and they kind of were lesser than previously, like they went 8-4, 9-3 type years. Like they're still a pretty good team. Like obviously, I think Miami's floor is lower, and I think it's close. Like I really went back and forth with this. I really debated myself, and I came out at the end saying, look, if everything hits right and upside goes well, I do think Miami has pretty immense upside, just both nationally and when it comes to the ACC. But I will say, and I know this is a Georgia Tech pod, but I do think Miami and Clemson are in terms of roster talent, a good bit better. But obviously, there's a lot more that goes into winning football games. And, I think Miami's schedule is 10 times harder than, say, Georgia Tech's. I mean, Miami's got to play Notre Dame, Florida. They got to play Louisville. They got to play SMU. Like, it's much harder than Georgia Tech's. So there's a lot of things you can consider. But, so that's it. We were pretty consensus on some things. Like, I think we both feel Miami and Clemson are a little bit better than everybody else in terms of roster talent. I hope everybody hears that, like roster talent. Like, not saying they're just going to be miles better than everybody in the conference, because obviously I've said it a million times already, but Clemson stubbed their toe a couple times, like, losing to Louisville, and they had some close ACC games. Miami obviously lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse down the stretch and had some other close calls as well. So roster talent obviously doesn't mean anything. So I do want that to be clear. Like in terms of roster talent, we do think they're better. Look, Louisville, we both think is a top 3 team. We both like Georgia Tech heading into the year. I'm a little lower on SMU just in terms of national. I think they'll be a good ACC team. I'm just not. I don't have them ranked in the top 25. My top 25 personally right now. I just don't have them there. And then again, it's just kind of, I think Florida State and Duke have some upside to be in that top 4 or 5 group and be in contention to maybe make the ACC title game. And then 8 through 14 is just good luck picking that. But again, things like this are built for discussion. We hope to hear plenty of it. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements. I'm sure there's going to be people agreeing with us. We welcome all conversation. Absolutely. And just, before we get out of here, of course, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you hadn't already, follow us wherever you get your podcast. We will be back to preview the ACC tournament next week. Obviously some exciting thing, baseball is underway right now against Duke. So we're going to do that and, appreciate you guys following us. All the love you and support you've shown us. We really appreciate that. And we will see you next time.